So in this video, we're going to run through the histology for the endocrine system. There's not that many slides for this chapter as far as histology goes. In future chapters, it will be a little bit more heavy for some of the chapters, but this one is not so much, so it shouldn't take that long. What I have done for this video is I went ahead and just put an outline, and I usually do this for my histology videos. I just put an outline of what exactly we're looking for. So this comes directly out of the lab manual for the checkpoints that you have to hit or be able to identify for each slide. So for the pituitary gland, which is our first one up, we're going to be looking for the adenohypophysis. I don't know how to pronounce that. It's the anterior pituitary, which is this big long A word, right? Which you can write as anterior pituitary. And then we have the posterior pituitary, which is the neuro. Now, I went ahead and listed the hormones that is secreted from each area. For the anterior, we're going to have human growth hormone, which is going to help with growth factors such as when you're growing from puberty or growing different areas, and it goes to different areas of your body, but it's just regulated for growth. The big one that a lot of people associate this one with, which I know I did too, this is what a pregnancy test looks for, is the human growth hormone, because you're growing a fetus inside of you. So that's one of the hormones that pop up, and that's what a pregnancy test is looking for. It's going to trigger the human growth hormone. We're also going to have the TSH, which is your thyroid stimulating hormone. So it's going to stimulate your thyroid to go ahead and secrete the T3 and T4. We're going to have LH and FSH, which these two hormones are for reproductive purposes. Follicle stimulating hormone is going to stimulate the follicle so that you can ovulate. And the luteinizing hormone helps to regulate that as well, works with this one. Now, prolactin, that's going to be the hormone that's going to allow for the milk letdown when you are having a baby and you're wanting to breastfeed. That hormone makes it possible. We also have melanocyte stimulating hormone, which has to do with the melanocytes producing melanin. And then we have the adrenocorticotropic hormone, which that's going to be with the corticotrophs. This one is going to be like for cortisone and different things, for different things of that nature. From the posterior pituitary, we have ADH and oxytocin. ADH is the antidiuretic hormone, which is going to help to bring up blood pressure. And you can read a little bit more about that one. I don't want to go into too much detail on hormones because this is a histology one, but I just wanted to touch on them just briefly. Oxytocin, this is the hormone, it's a bonding hormone. A lot of people associate it with like the love or cuddle hormone. This one's going to help also to give you, to allow you to have contractions while you're giving birth. Now, I will point out here that the posterior pituitary does not make these two hormones. These two hormones are made by the hypothalamus, and the hypothalamus gives them to the posterior pituitary so that the posterior pituitary stores them and releases them when it's time. So this is just an overall general picture of the pituitary gland, which you might have to identify when you're doing your practical. So if you have this slide and it asks you to identify this gland, right? That's where you would say, this is the pituitary gland. Now, if it's asking you, if it has a pointer and it's pointing to this region here where I have my mouse, when it's asking for a specific region, that's when we're going to go in and we're going to say, well, this is the posterior pituitary, and then this right here would be the anterior pituitary. Now, when we're looking at these and trying to remember which side is which, I always kind of associated it with the anterior pituitary sends out a lot more hormones than the posterior. So the darkened region of it, it's full. That's how I remembered it in my mind, was that the darker one means that it's full. It's giving out a lot more than the empty one over here that can't make its own and only gives out 2, right? So this is your posterior. This is your anterior here. And let's look at a couple more. This is a very similar slide to the ones that you would find in the lab. This one, number 1 would be your anterior. This would be your posterior over here. Okay. And a lot, one thing that is specific about this slide is you can see a clear division of the anterior to posterior, right? So that's one distinction that you can make when looking at the slide and trying to figure out what gland this is. When I'm giving suggestions to people for studying histology, I always tell them to look at as many slides as possible. And when you're looking at those slides, try to find distinct characteristics about the slide that you're looking at that is the same no matter what slide you're looking at. So for example, we know that it's going to be divided. We know that one region is going to be darker than the other, and we can kind of see the shape of it. So, and clicking back over to this one, we can see the line where it's divided, the darker region, the lighter region, and the shape. So those things will kind of help you when studying. I put this slide in here because I thought it would be neat to show where the hypothalamus is in relation to the anterior and the posterior pituitary. Now, the pituitary gland kind of hangs off the hypothalamus in the brain, right? So when we think that the posterior pituitary is getting its hormones directly from the hypothalamus, right? So the hypothalamus is able to send those hormones down via the infundibulum here and send the hormones directly down into the posterior pituitary. Now, it does have a capsule that surrounds it, which you can see there. And you can also see that to associate it of where it is in the brain, it's showing you here that the third ventricle is here. If you can remember back to AP1 when you were studying brain anatomy and the ventricles of the brain. So that'll kind of give you an idea of how to associate it in relation to where it's at in the body. The next one that we have is the thyroid and parathyroid glands. So with the thyroid, what we're going to be looking for is the thyroid follicle, which contains the colloid. And then we have the follicular cells that surround the follicle. And that is where we get T3 and T4. T3 and T4 are our metabolism hormones. So they're what we use to metabolize the foods that we eat in our body. Parafollicular cells is also located in the thyroid gland. Parafollicular cells is going to give calcitonin. Now, calcitonin is going to bring blood calcium levels down. So the parathyroid gland, our glands, gives us parathyroid hormone. Parathyroid hormone is going to increase blood calcium levels. So I always kind of tried to find my opposing hormones, and ones, just ones that do the opposite of one another. It's easier to study it that way if you can find, like, okay, parathyroid versus calcitonin. A quick way to remember calcitonin, cal is in here, so we know it's going to be calcium, right? And N is kind of like inhibiting, so it's decreasing the levels of calcium in the blood, or in the bloodstream, but parathyroid hormone is increasing it. So when we have too much, we'll get calcitonin levels to come in so that we can bring our calcium levels down. And like I said, I don't want to go too much into it, but you can read more. But that's a quick way to remember that. So let's look at this slide. I kind of put this in here so that you can see relation in the body. The parathyroid glands are going to set directly behind the thyroid here, and the thyroid gland itself rests right in the middle of the neck region. Okay. Boom. Okay. So this is a big, broad overview of the thyroid gland, and you can kind of see the parathyroid glands right there in that dark purple. Now, the thyroid gland itself is going to look like a bunch of bubbles, okay? Which we're going to look at a little bit deeper. Let me see which slide is best to look at real quick. Okay, let's look at this one. So here we have a follicle. Now, here's a follicle. Here's a follicle. These are all the bubbles are follicles to the thyroid gland. Inside of the follicle, we have the colloid. The colloid is this area in here that is just the inside of the bubble, right? In the colloid is where we store iodine, and iodine is is used to make T3 and T4 are to help with our metabolism. So it's very important that you have an adequate amount of iodine in your diet, because that's what we use it for. So in this colloid, that's iodine in here. So we have our follicle, we have our colloid, and then around the follicle itself is where we're going to find those follicular cells. Think follicular cells, follicles. So they're just going to be the ones that's right around the edge. Now we also have parafollicular cells in the thyroid gland as well. Those are going to be the ones that's off to the side, are in between the follicles. So here would be some right here. This would be some here. Here is some right here. So you kind of get the idea. Now, this would be the follicular cells, and this would be the parafollicular cells here. Okay, we're going to look at a couple more slides of this. So here is our follicular cells surrounding our follicle. This is the colloid here. It might help if I draw. Let's see if it's going to let me draw with my mouse. Okay, so colloid, and this whole thing is the follicle. These cells here would be our follicular cells. And over here would be our parafollicular cells. Here's some here too. Here's a big area of them over here. Okay. Let's see. Did we look at this picture? Yes, we did. Here, oh, this was a perfect picture of the follicular cells, the follicle and the colloid that you can look at here. This region here would be our parafollicular cells. Now, if we looked at this image, which is a broader view, you can still see our little bubbles in here. But what you see on the outside over here, this dark, it's always going to be, we talked about those characteristics, it's always going to be a darker shade than your thyroid hormone. So this would be our parathyroid hormone here. I mean, parathyroid gland, I'm sorry. Okay. So let me make sure that we hit, we'll go back to this list here real quick and make sure we hit everything. And we did, so we're going to move on. Okay, so next is the adrenal gland. Now, when you're looking in your book at the page that has the histology for the adrenal gland, it's kind of confusing in a way, or, well, all of the histology, I had one person, I'm not going to call this person out, but she messaged me, not going to say who she is, but she messaged me and she was kind of overwhelmed because she says, you know, this book is all over the place. There's information in the back by the histology, there's information up front, you know, like I just feel like it's all over the place. So what I kind of told her is, you know, I understand that it might feel like that, but if you, all the information that's in this histology section is important to know because this can be used on the test, but also it gives you a lot more information about that particular gland itself. It's telling you all about the cells that's going to be in there, the regions and the different things that the regions, like the cortex here of the adrenal gland and the different things that come from those regions. So what I suggested to her was to go back and first off, go and make your notes from the exercise one, like the first part of it. And then when you get to the histology part and you're looking at all of that information, maybe go back in and add that information to your notes that you already have taken so that you can make sure that you have everything included and you're not forgetting to look at this part because there is a lot of information in just these few pages. So with the adrenal gland, we're going to be looking for the capsule. We're going to look for the cortex and the medulla. In the medulla, we're going to look for medullary capillaries. And in the cortex, we're just going to be identifying the three regions of the cortex that secretes different things from each region is different from the other, but they all secrete their own little type of hormones, right? So in the medulla is where we're going to get epinephrine and norepinephrine. Now, where I put NOE dot, that's just my abbreviation. That's not the correct abbreviation. I just didn't feel like spelling it out. But I thought it would be nice to point out the difference between epinephrine and norepinephrine. So both of them work to raise your blood sugar and your heart rate. Both of them are going to help your heart to contract stronger so that you have more, you're increasing the contractility, which you'll learn about more in the next chapter, I believe. But the big difference in these two is that norepinephrine is going to work on alpha receptors which is going to be just in the arteries. So it's going to work to narrow the blood vessels. So it's going to vasoconstrict, which is going to allow for your blood pressure to go up. Now, with these two, we always associate these two with the fight or flight response. So when you're in that fight or flight mode, you need that extra energy and the blood flow, and you need your blood pressure is going to go up because you're in a heightened state. So I just figured it would be helpful to point out the differences between, or the main difference in those two. So, in the cortex, we're going to have three regions, right? The zona glomerulosa, which is where we're going to get mineralocorticoids. Now, the main form of this is usually aldosterone. Now, aldosterone is going to be used to reabsorb sodium and secrete potassium in the kidneys or in the urine. You know, you're gonna reabsorb the sodium back into the body, and you're gonna secrete the potassium out. Now, what this is doing is it's used to bring up your blood pressure, but it's also bringing up your blood volume, because whenever we take in sodium, water loves sodium. And if you can remember anything from this video, I would say that would be a very important point, is water loves sodium. So water is going to follow sodium. So when we bring in the water along with the sodium, we're increasing the amount of fluid that is in our blood. So it increases our blood volume, which then increases the blood pressure. Because if you have more blood volume if you're trying to pump a heavier solution or a thicker solution, right? So you have more blood volume, it's going to raise the blood pressure. So that's kind of how aldosterone works to raise blood pressure. Now, in the zona fasciculata, these words, okay, the zona fasciculata, this is where we're going to get glucocorticoids, which is mostly in the form of cortisol. Now, cortisol, which if you're using it as a medicine, is hydrocortisone. This is going to be the main stress hormone. So, and I'm not talking like stress like, oh, you're stressed out because you have this test coming up. Mainly it's like stress on the body. So if you're putting physical stress on the body, or if you're needing to reduce inflammation, and it does help to regulate blood sugar and metabolism as well. So that is where we get that is the story behind cortisol. The zona reticularis, this is going to be the area that we get androgens from. Now, androgens are our sex hormones. So that's pretty much what is happening there. Okay, so let's start looking at the slides for this. The adrenal glands sit right directly on top of the kidneys, okay? Which is important because if you're thinking about the aldosterone, right, that's coming from the zona glomerulosa, and it works on the kidneys because remember, we're taking in that sodium from the kidneys and we're secreting out the potassium. So it's kind of nice that it's right there setting on the kidney. I don't know if that's any relation to it, but that's what I'm going to say. Now, we're going to have the adrenal cortex, which is going to be the outside, and the medulla. A lot of AP2 histology in terms of like cortex and medulla, that comes up a whole lot. I don't know if I remember it much from AP1, but I could be wrong in that. But AP2, I feel like there's a cortex and medulla to everything. So in the cortex, and it's showing you, it's just taking a small section of it, is where you're going to see the 3 zones. Okay. Okay. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to find the apical surface here, right? So we can see that this is our capsule right here. Okay, let me change colors to black so that this can be seen a little bit better. Okay. So we have our our capsule, I'm sorry. This whole area here, so I'm going to draw a big line, is going to be our cortex. And then here, and this is not the whole thing, but just a little portion of it, there's our medulla. Okay. Now, when trying to figure out the regions in the cortex, right? The biggest thing that's going to help you here, and a lot of people struggled with this slide. I remember just from tutoring, tutoring or helping people look at this slide or seeing them look at the adrenal gland. This really took people just off the rocker. Like, how am I going to remember this? I don't see this at all. What you need to look for is the color differences, okay? So what I'm going to do real quick is I'm going to erase these lines so that I can have like a blank slate here. And I'm going to just draw this and divide these. And let's just put a line here and put a line here. So we know that this is our apical surface here, our apical surface, right? So the first one that's out to the world is our glomerulosa, our zona glomerulosa. Don't forget zona. Now, I will tell you a funny way, or just like a silly way, I guess you can say, to remember this, okay? So glomerulosa starts with a G, and think it's the closest to going out into the world. Now, next we have our fascicularis, right? And it is the largest of the three. So I always remembered it as being fat. Now, the only one that's left is reticularis or zona reticularis. So that one's going to be right there. It's your R. It's just the one that's left over. So if you can remember these two and the ways that we just came up to remember them, you'll know that the third one is going to be your reticularis. Okay, so let's look at it from a different perspective. All right, so again, I'm going to draw those lines for that color difference. And this probably, let's cross this one out. This one probably goes to about here. We'll just say that this is it. And then, yeah, that's okay. Let me erase this. Let's try this once more. This isn't perfect, but you kind of get the drift here. Okay, so we have our glomerulosa, closest to going out in the world. We have our big fat daddy right here, fascicularis. And then we have our one that's left over, our R. And then this would be our medulla. And then here, this line that you can see going right here, this is the capsule. So this is your adrenal capsule. A capsule is going to encapsulate, right? So this is going to be, it's just, and you can see it here. I think I pointed it out. This is your capsule here, right? So let's look at this one. This is a lot easier for me to see. I don't know about you, but this would be our medulla here. Medulla. Here's our reticularis. And then this would be our, about to here, I believe, would be our fascicularis. And then our glomerulosa, our capsule, and then our apical surface should be over here. Now, in the medulla, you're going to have a medullary capillary, which are going to be these little buddies in here. So if you're worried about, and here, I'll show you, I'm going to just draw this out while I'm talking. If you're worried about trying to find the medullary capillary, or if you're going to remember, a quick way to think about this is that if your pointer, and let me just see here. So this is the medulla, right? All this area, and this too, but I didn't include that. Okay, so if your teacher or whoever for your practical has a pointer pointing right here, right? And they say, what is this structure? So that would be your key to say medullary capillary, right? If it is listed as, what is this region? So that would be your key to say the adrenal medulla, or the medulla of the adrenal gland. However you want to put it is fine. So you can clearly see the three distinctions, right? So this would be our reticularis. This would be our fasciculata. And then our glomerulosa. This would be the capsule here, all of this that you can see going around, and our apical surface. So there you go. And there's another picture as well. And that would be the medulla here, and here, let's draw it out. Medulla and reticularis, just so you can see. Okay, so the pancreas. The pancreas is, we're going to be looking for pancreatic acini and the aisles of Langerhans. Now, the aisles of Langerhans is where we're going to get insulin and glucagon. We're also going to receive pancreatic peptide from there and somatostatin. Now, insulin and glucagon are just like parathyroid hormone and calcitonin N. What I mean by that is they are opposers. So insulin is going to work to bring down blood sugar, while glucagon is going to bring up blood sugar. So you can kind of remember that like glucose, like we're adding glucose to the blood. Pancreatic peptide is going to be useful in digestion, because it's going to it's going to help to bring down the acidity from the stomach juices. I don't want to get, okay, we're not going to go into that too much. This is a big regulator. This can stop glucagon and insulin, so it's kind of like a mediator. That's how I always thought about it. Where it's located in the body. So the pancreas sits a little bit behind the stomach, okay? The pancreas, and when I was talking about that helping with digestion and that pancreatic peptide, right? It's going to pour directly into the small intestine. So, and I'll just touch on it briefly. The stomach acid, or the stomach is very acidic, right? So when we're emptying, we're doing gastric emptying and emptying the contents that are highly acidic now into the small intestine. If it wasn't for these pancreatic juices that are coming out of here and going into the small intestine would essentially burn up, like it would just like fry from all this acidity. So it kind of neutralizes and helps to neutralize that acidity. So you can see the spleen over here is right to the left of the pancreas, right? So I just thought I would point this out. And of course, the pancreatic hormones, insulin and glucagon, that's what it's mainly known for. Now, I thought it would be, or I just wanted to include this picture in here. This is one that's similar to your textbook, or the one that you'll see in your textbook, right? So this is a pancreatic, or an isle of Langerhans, or pancreatic islet, or whatever you want to call it. You know what I'm talking about, right? So in this, we have different cells that secrete different things. Like we have the F cell that's going to give our pancreatic polypeptide. We have the beta cell that's going to give insulin, alpha cells, glucagon, and our delta cells that secretes that somatostatin. So it's always easier if you have a visual of what is actually going on and what is being secreted from each, right? So here's a picture, and this one that I found already kind of highlighted these little islands, right? So when you're looking at the pancreas, you want to kind of think of it like the vast sea. And these pancreatic islands, or isles of Langerhans, are going to be those light sandy patches, right? But remember, it has all those cells in it secreting all those things we need. So the pancreatic acini is going to be everything out here. So if it's not in an isle and it's in the vast sea, it's usually acini. Okay, we're going to look at just a couple more pictures of the pancreas. Here we go. So right off, we can see those aisles, right? So here's an aisle, here's an aisle. And when you're seeing this is usually like an artery or a vein or some kind of blood flow into the artery. So don't worry about those. And here's all our acini, the vast sea. Okay, and one more picture. This one's a little hard to see, but here's our aisle here, and this is all acini. Now, your book describes, or your lab manual describes acini is dark berry-like clusters. And you can kind of see, I think that's why I included this slide, because you can kind of see they are kind of clustered together, the acini. Now, the aisle, if you're having a problem or you find a slide that's harder to see, or harder to tell where the aisle is, you can always kind of go about the way of looking at it as what direction is the cells flowing. That kind of helps too, because you can see these cells clearly go a different way than these. Well, this actually is a part of that aisle here. But you see how this is a differentiation than like right here, right? I don't know if that helps you at all, but there it is. So, I want to thank you for watching this video. If you like it, please give it a thumbs up or leave a comment so that I can get more people to see my videos. It's kind of like a YouTube algorithm thing. If you can, share this video with your friends that you're studying with, and sharing is caring. Help a friend out. And I thank you for watching, and have a great night.